Welcome to the Strategy Skills podcast. I'm your host, Chris Safarova, and our podcast sponsor today is strategytraining.com. If you want to strengthen your strategy skills, you can get the overall approach used in well-managed strategy studies. It's a free download we prepared for you, and you can get it at firmsconsulting.com/overall approach. You can also get McKinsey and BCG winning resume, which is a resume that got offers from both of those firms, and you can get it at firmsconsulting.com/resume PDF. And the last gift I have for you today is a copy of a book I co-authored with some of our amazing clients. It's called 9 Leaders in Action, and you can get it at firmsconsulting.com/gift. And today we have with us JP Pawliw-Fry, who is a world-renowned keynote speaker, the author of the New York Times bestseller Performing Under Pressure, which was named Inc. magazine's best business book of the year. He teaches a leadership course at the Kellogg Graduate School of Management. And over the last 25 years, JP worked with leaders and high-pressure performers around the world, from Navy SEALs and Olympic athletes to executives at global organizations like Intel and Coca Cola and NASA. JP, welcome.
Thank you, Chris. Great to be here.
So, such an interesting career so far. Let's maybe focus a little bit on your story and then go right into your work.
Yeah, it's interesting you say, it's a interesting career. My mom still doesn't know what I do. She's like, you go and talk to organizations. What is that? You go and give speeches. What is that? So I'm not sure she even knows what I do.
Could you give us a little bit of an overview how you ended up doing the work you're doing now?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I had a very science, human biology background. And 35 years ago, I found myself, even though I was brought up like Roman Catholic as they come, in a Buddhist monastery in Asia, several. But over a couple of years, I spent a bit of time in different monasteries. And for someone who has a bit of ADHD, which I do, it was a revelation that there's an internal technology available to anyone that can be helpful in training attention and impulse control. And it grabbed me. And I was like, wow. And that's really the start. And then there's lots more, academic and other endeavors to get to where I am. But that was the first part. I would say the second part, I was teaching, working in a psychiatric hospital with patients with stress and chronic pain. And some business people and some athletes said, they took the course I was teaching. They said, can you teach us? And it's funny because it didn't even occur to me, even though I kind of love sports in a certain way, although I'm not really a fanatic, but and I did. And then before I knew it, I was working with Olympic athletes and business people were saying, hey, can you teach us how to, manage our brain under pressure? And so that's really the origin story of, that was like 30 years ago. And then we started a company 26 years ago, and we're doing what we're doing and loving it.
Can you tell us a little more about your time at monasteries? That is an experience that most of us will never have.
Yeah. I mean, it was like I'm a bit of a seeker, even though I was doing all the science curriculum in my undergrad degrees. I did take some religion courses. I've always been a bit of, interested in something more than just the science. And I remember being in Bangkok and meeting this, Swiss and American fellow, and they were telling me about this, silent retreat. And that's interesting. So, I went to the south of Thailand and tried to get in for this 10-day silent retreat. And to be honest, my very first experience, they didn't have any room, but they had just transcribed the 10-day retreat into, onto like 80 or 100 pages of notes. So I paid 100 baht maybe, which is like $3. It's the best $3 I ever spent. So I actually went to a different monastery where they don't take Westerners normally. They don't speak English. And I asked, can I, sit my own retreat here? And I did. And it was just, kind of one of those life-changing experiences. Most people don't know that they have this experience of input of stimuli in the form of any of the senses or interacting with someone, and instantly right after a story about those stimuli or that interaction. We have a story that follows almost every experience, every kind of sensation, sense experience that we have, a story, and we don't know that. And that story is often wrong. It's based on, a very little bit of information. Because of the way our brain works, we jump to judgment based on less than 5% of available information. But we don't know this. We don't know that we are not our thoughts or this story. We don't know that. And because people don't know that, they cause themselves a huge amount of suffering and a huge amount of angst. And they're not very effective under pressure. I mean, we know, we shared some of the research in the book, Performing Under Pressure, that you referenced, that we do worse under pressure, not better under pressure. It's a total myth that, we think, some athletes are better under pressure. No, that's not true. Everyone is diminished under pressure. It's just those who are the high performers are diminished less than everyone else. They've learned some tools of self-regulation. And so that was a revelation to me. And this is, of course, a 2,500-year tradition. This has nothing to do with any insight I have. But that was kind of an eye-opening experience. And then I thought, hey, I want to bring this to people. I didn't think of business people or athletes at the time, but that's what it's evolved to.
That transcript that you got for $3, what were some of the key things you learned from it?
Gosh, I mean, do we have 5 hours? I mean, not that I can remember it that well, but I mean, the richness of wisdom is just... So here's a bit of a myth that I think people have about meditation or mindfulness. They think it's about a practice to calm your mind. It's most definitely not. It has nothing to do with calming your mind. It's a total myth. It might have the kind of effect, a consequence of calming your mind. But the real thing that's going on is you're changing your relationship to whatever's going on in that moment. That's what it was in that transcript, right? So you're frustrated that you're late. You're upset about a relationship. You can't sleep over something. Whatever. And we don't realize that we have a relationship to that. And most of us are trying to control things we can't control. And so what was in that manuscript was, can you watch your reaction to learn something about yourself, which then will help you be more effective. And if you're an aggressive learner, that'll help you grow a certain amount of wisdom, which means the next moment you're going to be a little bit more effective, a little less affected by what the events. And this is what's going to help you live with a little bit more ease, a little bit more focus. And so it's actually more of a wisdom. It's probably, you could say it's a wisdom and it's a compassion tradition more than it's a calming your mind tradition. So when you see things as they are, that sounds so airy-fairy, I imagine, but when you see your mind and how it just jumps from topic to topic to topic, and you realize, I don't have to get too attached to that, that grows a wisdom. When you realize that if you grow some compassion, first and foremost for yourself, that changes so much of your neurochemistry, by the way, but also your experience of another person, of seeing a big picture, and on and on and on. So, and all of this can be trained. That's the part probably in the transcript more than anything. You got to put the time in. You got to sit down. You got to watch. And, just think about it. We train lawyers for how many years? Doctors for how many years? Academics for how many years? It makes sense. There's skills really. So you got to train. We don't do that for the mind. And yet it's the most important thing we really do need to train.
That is very true. So once you had the transcript and you went through it, you went and created your own meditation, silent meditation retreat. Can you take us through that experience?
Sure. I mean, it's not that I mean, so I went to I got the transcript in the south of Thailand, and where I went was to the kind of north of Thailand, not north, but just outside of Bangkok, a couple hours, three or 4 hours, Chonburi province of all places. And, I don't know how I chose that one, but, the head person or one of the people spoke passable English. And I just said, look, here's my story. Could I, and he was like, sure. And so, this is interesting because this is all new to me, but you wake up at 3 or 4 in the morning and essentially you either sit for 45 minutes an hour or walking meditation for 45 minutes an hour. And you do that essentially all day till, 8 p.m. at night, and then you go to bed. And you have one meal at, 11 o'clock-ish. And that's what you do. I mean, and what's interesting is like you kind of think, oh, that sounds boring. It's not boring. It's hard work, by the way, because you sit there at times and you're meditating, and then you have the story, you have this memory about your brother or your sister or a friend where you got, and you get agitated and you go for 10 or 15 or 20 minutes, maybe an hour, and you're agitated. And then you realize a couple hours later, oh, that came and it went. And that's some big insight. Whatever was upsetting me an hour ago has gone away. This too has passed. And so you're like, I mean, what happened? I mean, nothing happened. So why can't I get sooner to that place of letting it pass? And that's like this huge insight. I'll give you a good one in the retreat. There was this, I don't know if it was called a macaw bird. I really don't, but I read that somewhere that there's macaw birds and they make this sound. So we'll call it a macaw bird, but it was like this, outside, like a very, rich in trees, like a tropical kind of forest kind of feel. And like above the monastery, there's this bird going, gah, gah, gah. And just at a particular time for a particular length of, and then it would at first, and then it felt like it was all the time. And then all of a sudden I get, of course, agitated to hear this. And I'm just like, oh, would you stop it? And you're like, oh my God, that damn bird. And, this whole story. Then at some point you're like, okay, it's just a sound. Then what's my reaction, my relationship to the sound? Again, right? And that's everything in life. So that would be, and then I eventually left and was fortunate enough to go to other monasteries. But that was the one that probably had the biggest impact on me. Because, it's just like you don't know what you don't know. It was such an eye-opener I don't know if you've ever scuba dived. Have you ever scuba dived? Okay, so I'm not a big scuba diver, but for those who are listening, if you scuba dive, there's a moment where you're under the surface kind of for the first time, and you're like, oh my God, there's a whole world under here. I didn't know that existed. Because on the surface, you just see this flat water and, it's almost a mirror. Like you can't see inside. Then you're underneath and you're like, oh my gosh, why didn't somebody tell me? That's the same experience. I would say that meditation or mindfulness can be.
Such an interesting explanation of this. So you compared it to going scuba diving and seeing the world under it. So how is there a world that we don't know about when we do meditation beyond what you explained, that we're reacting to things versus being able to be kind of above it and let it pass and not let it hurt us unnecessarily? I'm trying to understand why you compared practice of those 10 days of doing 45 minutes per hour from 3 to 8 meditating to being underwater and seeing this whole world you haven't seen before.
Yeah, I think it's almost like we don't know what's going on in our mind. Like we don't know what's under the sea, so to speak. And you're kind of shocked that it's there. Like you cannot believe for a heartbeat. You literally cannot believe for a heartbeat that there is this, under the surface, there's these fish and there's like, it's incredible. Like it's beautiful. It's mind-blowing. And that you're like, wow. And maybe it's even more powerful. Like it's visually beautiful, obviously under the sea, but in meditation, um, we're all kind of suffering with something. There's some angst. Like you have some, I have some, my dog here has some, everyone listening has some. And we kind of almost accept it like, well, this is life. And, it's kind of, I don't want to say it's hard. Well, it is hard. And this is just the way it is. And we don't really question what could we do to change our relationship to it. And so that might be as much the big revelation is, oh my gosh, I actually can do something about this. Wow. I think that to me was almost as much as anything. And then, the more you practice, the more you realize you're a little bit more self-compassionate, right? When I make a mistake, I make as many as anyone. There's just a little bit more tenderness that I have towards myself because of this practice. There's no question about that. Do you think I'm better to come into a meeting after making a mistake and having some self-compassion, and I'm now in that next meeting, or I'm now trying to think, strategically, let's say, do you think I'm better in that moment because I don't have that angst and that dis-ease? Of course, right? That's that whole internal technology that's available to us. And so that to me it was revelatory. I think it's just that both were revelatory because they're there and you don't know they're there.
JP, and can you tell us what happened over time? So I would assume something changed. Was there some kind of defining moment for you when something shifted as you were going through the meditation practice?
Well, I mean, if anyone here who's listening has done any of this, there's a couple of things where you get really painful in the body. And again, it's just like the bird. It's just another thing. So I think it's just the number of the big aha was, changing your relationship. Like it's for instance, and we know this in our world of neuroscience, that we actually don't feel emotion. No, everyone's going, what? I've been frustrated. I've been angry. Of course there's emotion. No, there's actually just sensations. In fact, there's only two sensations that the brain recognizes: pleasant to neutral to unpleasant on a scale. So pleasant, or energy, physiological arousal. We call it charge, from highly charged to neutral to not very charged. So that's it, right? But what the body does is that it takes in these sensations, it compares it to the experience template that we all have. It makes a prediction because it compares it to what's happened before, makes a prediction. Am I okay? Am I not okay? And the label it puts on that prediction is what emotions are. And so what's interesting is that, and this is not my big insight, that other people talk about this, but it's like neuroscience and this Buddhist mindfulness tradition are really saying the same thing, which is mind-blowing, really. And so that was part of the revelation for me. And then it's just the more you practice. So it's been 35 years for me. The more you practice, the more you get a little bit better at it. You get a little bit more at accepting, for instance, the stuff that you can't change, right? There's like this appreciation of the kind of the joy and sorrow that is this experience, and that just comes. And so now you just have a relationship. You accept it. You also take action on the stuff you can, but you learning that acceptance that things are as they are, that was really revelatory for me.
That is beautiful. To be able to get to that place faster, accepting. Are you currently able to accept immediately, or do you still need to go through a certain period of turmoil inside?
That's a great question. Happens? I think it's probably best to ask my kids or my wife, really. But this is a hard one because I think it's degrees. I think I know compared to 35 years ago, I know that I accept way more. I'm easy. I'm able to flow with things and not get as, overwrought. There's no question. But it's not to say that there aren't times, especially when it's an important relationship with my kids or something, where, it keeps me up at night, that I'm sitting there going, are they okay? And are we okay? Kind of. So it's still there. But even there, I'll say this, to know that, so this to me is maybe part of what you're asking. And it took me a minute to get here, but when you're in the middle of a kind of a storm, we call it a PET storm, physical sensation, P, emotion, E, and then thoughts, stories, PET. When you're in the middle of a PET storm, which is just, you're up at night or wherever it is. If you've been through it many times, it's kind of like some of the athletes I work with. If you've been through this multiple times and you see that it comes and it goes and it comes and it goes, and it's really a sine wave, all of a sudden, when you're in the middle of it, you have that little awareness to say, you know what? I've felt this before. In fact, I'll feel it again. Just let it be. Not try and push it away, by the way, because that gives its power, but just let it be for as long as it's there, and just don't add to it a second arrow of, I shouldn't be feeling this, right? But the first arrow is just whatever we're feeling. The second is feeling bad that we're feeling it, right? No, just let it be. And then it just goes away on its own. That to me, it was that's where I'm probably better now than I've ever been before. I can just see it, accept it, know it'll pass, and and then have that kind of a relationship to it.
Would you say you're, in a way, an observer of what's happening versus being inside of that black cloud?
Yeah, Chris, really, that's a tremendous way to think about it. Because that's it, right? Can we sit there and see what's going on, have a bit of perspective? Absolutely. And that is almost the experience. It's like there's this space between whoever, whatever I am, and these thoughts and this kind of pet storm. But and you sit there and there's a space between me and it, and it gives you a bit of perspective. So yeah, absolutely. And you kind of see the long view, right? Like, again, a month ago, a week ago, a year ago, I had whatever, and now it's gone. Where did it go? It's not like and some stuff, look, you got to take action on for sure. It's not about being passive, by the way, for anyone listening, but there's this sensation where you go, I can just sit here. I can just let it, be, and it'll pass on its own, which is where we have our real control and our power.
For someone listening now who wants to try this, and they have tried meditation, they're doing meditation, but they're not getting the results they want, what would be your recommendation?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a really good question. To me, it's you kind of have to let go of results. It's like when I work with athletes, right, in high pressure, like, Olympics, or work with NFL teams, NBA teams, stuff like that. There's a real attachment to outcome, right? We got to win. And actually, that's why we underperform under pressure, because we're too attached to outcome. We got to let go of outcome. Just focus on, this moment, next task. And I would say if anyone's struggling, that is the same coaching I would give them. The other thing I would suggest is if someone has come to, this practice and it's interesting to them, and they're doing it kind of on their own, an hour a day, I would say it's going to be really hard to do that and make progress. What you really want to do, and there's some great centers, I'm happy to give some ideas, but in North America, where you can go for a longer retreat, 5, 7, I would suggest 10 days personally, because it's almost like it's going to a boot camp where the same, what you might get done in a year. And in fact, it's not even the same, because that hour a day, you don't build that continuity of practice to see the insights. So in fact, I try to do a 10-day retreat once a year now. Because of COVID, that's been thrown off. But that to me is what actually helps my daily practice be stronger. And so both two things for anyone who's struggling, not making progress, not getting traction, let go of outcome, and just drop into what are the things I can control, and really the process of it all. Next task, like the athlete, and then go and find a center where you can do this retreat, with some guidance, with some people who are a little ahead of you. That to me is how you're going to get traction in a way that makes you feel like you're making progress, even though we don't want to be too attached to progress.
And for someone listening who have no idea what to do when they're doing meditation, could you explain to them what they could do while doing walking meditation and while doing sitting meditation, if those were different for you?
Sure. So, I love both, and both are really important to do. It's really the same thing. You're using an anchor to watch something. So your breath when you're sitting could be your body when you're sitting, and then when you're walking, your body. You're just feeling your feet on the ground. For instance, for everyone right now, just to feel your feet contacting the ground, feel the warmth, feel the coolness where your foot is not touching the ground, and you're just like, okay, that becomes what you're focusing on. Or your breath when you're sitting. And it doesn't really matter what activity you're doing. You're just focusing on one of those, let's say. And then, if we do it long enough, in fact, just sit, close your eyes for a moment and just feel your breath at your nostril, if that's comfortable, and feel it come in and go out. So just feel the breath come in, feel the sensation, and go out. Where did your mind go? What story took it away? And just let go of the story and come back to breathing. And just opening our eyes. We could do this for a long time, but what's interesting is that for a lot of people, they've never had that awareness that I'm watching my breath or my feet or when I'm walking my body, whatever, and my mind wanders and it goes to story. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, what am I doing? Like I'm off. And that's one of the insights. It's just like, wow, okay, there's what's happening. And then there's this, it's almost like it's a theater of the mind. It's like a movie, right? And we don't know this. And so that to me is, some of the instruction that is what you want to cultivate in this practice.
Thank you. That is very helpful. And you also mentioned you can give some recommendations of the centers.
Yeah. I'm very, very happy to do that. Probably the first one, just off the top of my head, for people listening, if they don't go to the show notes, and we'll share more there, but is something called Insight Meditation Society, IMS. It's in the middle of Massachusetts, just north of Worcester, in Barre, Mass. Barre, Barre, Mass. It's just a beautiful, old nunnery. It's been there 40 years and 50 years probably, I think. And it's just like a tremendous place with great teachers. I had one of the athletes that I work with just finish a retreat there maybe a month ago or so. And he was just like, oh my gosh, JP, like he has been practicing, but he's like, it's kind of that same instruction we were mentioning earlier. Wow, I went there and all of a sudden it was like, there's just so much more learning. And if you're an aggressive learner, it's like, it's fascinating. And I'll just say this, there's no beliefs that you have to have, right? I was brought up Roman Catholic. There's people from every background there. There's no belief you have to believe this, because it's more a psychology of the mind more than a belief system. So, if that scares anyone, don't let it.
Thank you so much. So you mentioned a term, aggressive learner. I don't think I ever heard anyone saying that. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So, we survey 40,000 people a month. So we're, attempt anyway to do research and survey people. And one of my favorite stats of all of the data that we and others really have collected is this one, that high performers make mistakes like anyone. In fact, they might make more mistakes because they take more risks, but high performers make mistakes. But they extract 3 to 5 times more information from the same opportunity to learn as an average performer. So they have a meeting that doesn't go well. They have a process or a project or a new product, whatever, and it goes well, doesn't go well, but they're able to learn from the going well or not going well, and they're able to take that learning and put it into use, and they grow wisdom. Like, the truth is, if you and I and all of our listeners are lucky enough to still be alive in 5 years, I hope we've used the 5 years of experiences and grown from those 5 years so we're just a bit wiser, right, than we are now. That's the point. I think that's more than anything about being an aggressive learner. And in organizations, you can absolutely create a kind of an aggressive learning organization. You got to be mindful and intentional about it, but leaders can absolutely grow that. And it's critical, of course, if you want to innovate, if you want to do really good strategy. I mean, what is strategy? Really, strategy is making some choices, of course, but it's informed choices. And think about it. If you have people who are aggressively learning about their customers, the environment, and there's so much change today, so they're aggressive learners, and they're able to dig into the hard stuff. And this idea of the last 8%, right, of a conversation. And maybe I'll explain a bit more of that in a second. But if you have a team that is able to engage in that level of really, at times hard, but kind of really productive conversation, and they're aggressive learners, you're going to have a better strategy. There's no question you are.
Can you go deeper into this last 8%?
Sure. So what we know is that for a team to be high performing, there's one characteristic that is the most important above all, and that is to take risks, take sufficient risk. What do we mean by that? We mean interpersonal risk and strategic risk. Let's talk interpersonal. You're on a team. Do people speak up when they see something wrong or they have an idea that they think could help? Do people name inconvenient truths? On the highest performing teams, they do. They take that interpersonal risk. Now, they do it even though there's the chance that they might be, looked on as they don't know, they're incompetent, they might get humiliated. But the best teams build norms so they can take risks. But back to the last 8%. So we wanted to quantify risks that people needed to take. And so we did a study of 34,000 people. And we found that there's this gap between the risk that you and I and everyone listening knows in our bones we should be taking, having the hard conversation, making the strategy risk, whatever it is. But there's this, in our gut, we know there's this risk we should be taking. And then there's the risk we actually take. And there's a gap. It's 7.56%. That's what our research found. And so, we rounded it up to 8%, but that's where it's a hard stuff. It's the zone, you could say, of risk. But boy, because most people don't go there, if you go there, that becomes a competitive advantage for you. Now you're going to have the conversations that come up potentially with a better strategy, with the better execution of a strategy. And so our work is really around helping individuals, teams, and organizations, because we do this at scale, helping organizations build a culture, a courageous culture of courage, really, at scale and at speed, tools to move into the last 8%, to close that gap so that they can do great work.
Many leaders wake up at 3 a.m., 4 a.m., and their mind's racing, or they struggle to fall asleep. What strategies have you seen work best to quiet the mind before bed or when you wake up and you cannot sleep?
Well, I'm so not the person to ask, because unfortunately, and I'm trying not to, but I still darn well look at this phone before I go to bed. That's such a bad decision. When I'm on my game, I'm a bit better, but that's a challenge. So, I'm not really a sleep expert. So I'll give you some, working hunches, because this is something actually we do a lot with athletes, because they have trouble, of course, when they're night before a game, they get quite worked up. Actually, here's a place to start. If anyone's on listening and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm not sleeping and it's the night before my big presentation, don't worry about it. It doesn't matter. It's actually 2 nights before your presentation that matters for performance, not the night before. So that's helpful to know. Number one. Number two, I mean, really, it is. There's some physiology around temperature. You need to be cool. That's important for the body. And then it's, I meditate when I kind of can't sleep. But honestly, I don't want to I don't want to tell you something where it's not really my area of expertise.
Thank you for sharing. It's still very helpful. Maybe you would have had something. So I also wanted to ask you, what do you think is the most underrated skill for leaders when they navigate in high-pressure environments?
Yeah, great question. I mean, probably self-awareness, just to know how you show up when you're under pressure. You see, the truth is that people are not good at reading emotions on faces. In fact, they're horrible. We think we're good. We can't. We really can't read emotions on faces. So if you're a leader and you're walking in and you have no self-awareness about how you're showing up, maybe you just came from a meeting, you're frustrated. Well, people on your team, as you come into that meeting, they don't read faces very well, and they will misjudge your intention, right? They'll see this face that looks severe. They'll think it's about them. They'll confuse the impact that you're having on them for your intention. And so that's going to throw off, the performance of the team. So if you can have some self-awareness to know, first of all, people can't read me, so I've got to clarify my intention. There's ways when we work with organizations building high-performing cultures, there's ways to enter a meeting so that you actually let people know kind of where you're at, where everyone's at. And it's a real great gauge to build first kind of that connection. But then the second part, it allows people not to awfulize when they see, behavior like this. The other thing I would say is, in terms of a leader, is it's really about courage. Can you step in and be uncomfortable? Can you sit there and do something where you potentially feel like you might be humiliated? By the way, humiliation is the most damaging of emotions, just for the record. And so if you're a parent out there, be very careful if you ever get close to humiliating your child. It is the worst thing you can do, truly. But having said that, I think so probably self-awareness and courage. You asked me for one, I gave you two.
Thank you so much. To start wrapping up our time together, which was so interesting, you recently wrote a book, Performing Under Pressure. What do you want people to take out of that book?
Yeah, that's a great question. Probably to be a student of human behavior. That's all of our work, but certainly that book, right? The best investment you can make is not in a 401k or a investment account. The best investment is right here. It's understanding your brain, your mind, understanding your patterns. I mean, that's literally what we do with athletes and leaders. We help them understand their what we call their predictable default behavior. And when they understand that, all of a sudden they can navigate a little bit more easily through the hard stuff. And that makes all the difference in the world. And so, that book is really, it's the science of human behavior. And then there's like 22 kind of different solutions in the middle part of the book that, and not all of them will work for you because we're all different cats. We all have different ways that we go about things, but that comes from our practice of working with, these people under pressure. And so there will be one or two or three, hopefully, that can really help you, have a little bit more control over this mind, this experience. So at the end of the day, you can show up and be not your best under pressure because you won't be better than you've been before, but closer to your best. And so we kind of maybe one final point is, if you know that there's a chance that there's a higher likelihood that you will make a mistake under pressure, and you will, then when you make the mistake, you can let it go more easily. You're like, of course, right? And that's what high performers do. They're better at kind of managing when things go awry, when things are challenging. They have a different relationship. And so, if you tell yourself a story, I need to be perfect as I go into a big presentation, a big, strategy session, whatever it is, I need to be perfect to be successful. When you're imperfect, which you will be if you're under pressure, then if you believe that story, then you go into this downward loop. Whereas if you go and you go, okay, I expect that something will happen. It may not work out perfectly, and that's okay. And when it does, I'll just continue on and just water off a duck's back. That is a bit of a superpower that not many people possess.
JP, thank you so much for being here. Where can our listeners learn more about you, buy your book, anything you want to share?
Yeah, probably just our website, which is IHHP. So I is an institute, and then H is in health. Another H is for health, human potential, and IHHP.com. So, there's lots of information there. But listen, it's been my joy, Chris, to spend time with you. Thank you. I think the work you're doing is really important.
Thank you so much, JP. The work you're doing is also very important, and I really appreciate you being here and being so open and generous with sharing your experiences and the learnings so far. And I'm looking forward to see the big things you will continue doing in the world.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Our guest today again has been JP Pawliw-Fry. Check out his book, Performing Under Pressure. And our podcast sponsor today is strategytraining.com. If you want to strengthen your strategy skills, you can get the overall approach used in well-managed strategy studies. It's a one-pager download to start with, and you can get it at firmsconsulting.com/overall approach. And you can also get McKinsey and BCG winning resume. If you're currently updating your resume, it's a great resume to take a look at. And you can get it at firmsconsulting.com/resume PDF. And you can get a copy of a book I co-authored with some of our clients, and you can get it at firmsconsulting.com/gift. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and I'm looking forward to connect with you all next time.